Everyone, today more discussion about the gaming industry. This is somewhat of a part 2 of the disconnect with Square Enix. In my previous video, I kind of went in depth and shared my opinions on the state of Square Enix as I was covering their presentation. Not everything, I just kind of skimmed through all the corporate yapping and kind of just talked about my experience with Square Enix as a fan and how they feel really disconnected with not just their developers but also their core audience. I made that video because I am a very passionate Square Enix fan. I love a lot of their games. I love even their modern games. I know nowadays not a lot of people enjoy the modern games, you know, when it comes to the internet, but personally I'm one of those people who still enjoys a lot of Square Enix titles, but at the same time I've seen a lot of their very confusing, mind-boggling decisions throughout the past decade. So I highly recommend you guys watch that first before going on to here. But today's topic is about mobile gaming, and is it as really popular as what the industry has been saying to us for the longest time? You know, when it comes to its revenue, of course it makes a lot of money, but here in the West, is it as relevant? Because I've been actually kind of clipping some segments, putting it on YouTube Shorts and also my TikTok, and when I posted my segment about the Final Fantasy VII Battle Royale, someone has commented on here, and it made me sit down and think a lot about the state where the gaming industry is at, especially when it comes to mobile games. But before I get into it and showcase the video so you guys could have some context, no hate to the user at all. This is all discussion. This is all about the comment that this person made, purely for the argument, whether I disagree, agree, whatever. This is all video games at the end of the day. Nothing personal, nothing against the user at all. So just letting you guys know, this is all, again, this is just conversations and discussions for everyone to get into, because that's what I always encourage on this channel, is to always talk about how you feel about certain games, but of course I want it to be civil. Anyway, let's get right into it. You guys, Final Fantasy VII First Soldier, which is a mobile battle royale. Now, this was released during a time where battle royale was a bit trendy, although it does seem cringe that Square Enix is, at this point, they're kind of trend chasing what is good for the gaming market, you could say. From the gameplay footage I've seen and how the systems operated, it seemed like it was genuinely a fun game, because personally I actually do play battle royales, and yeah, First Soldier seemed like a fun game, especially had that Final Fantasy flavor on it. And I was actually wanting to play it when I heard when it was only exclusive to mobile, to the App Store. And it didn't make sense, because they made this game because they really wanted to be more in touch with a lot of the modern gaming audiences. But that didn't work because they made it exclusive to the App Store. It wasn't even ported over to the Steam store, the console stores. Eventually they closed it down, so a lot of resources, a lot of time has been wasted on Final Fantasy VII First Soldier. It seems like they weren't doing their research, because especially a lot of Western gamers, they hate mobile gaming, including me. Okay, so that last line kind of made me think about what I said, right? Especially when this person has commented that mobile gaming is a massive industry in the West. So that wasn't the issue. The issue is crossover between Final Fantasy fans and Battle Royale fans. Not to mention, Square buried this game pretty hard by locking it into a single platform and not really advertising it or pushing it in the competitive space. If this was put out on PS5 or PC, it might be still around, but I also don't think Square was too interested in supporting this. If I knew the Japanese tax code better, I think this game was a stunt to write bad decisions off. So first of all, let's kind of respond to the first line on what this user has said. Mobile gaming is a massive industry in the West, so that wasn't the issue. Now, this person kind of contradicted within the comment. I think I know what you're trying to say. Like, even if it's stuck to as a mobile only platform. It's the fact that Square Enix just didn't really want to support it, because knowing Square Enix, I don't know the background of yourself if you know how Square Enix operates, but personally my experiences with how I've seen Square Enix over the years, I mean, even the recent years of like how they treated The World Ends With You, they have like a very loyal following. I actually played my first The World Ends With You, which was the Neo sequel, you could say, and I really enjoyed that a lot, and it deserved all the love in the world, but Square Enix just did not put any sort of effort or marketing or support for that game for whatever reason. I don't know why, and I thought that was a very solid game. It was such a fun game to get into, and the art style was beautiful. The gameplay was fun to get into, and it was easy to get into for anyone. So it hit like certain standards, but I guess it just wasn't good enough for Square Enix to do the support that it should have. Back to the comment, you kind of contradicted yourself when you said about how Square buried this game by hard locking it into a single platform and not really advertising or pushing it in the competitive space. And you continue to say that if it was on the PS4 PC, it might still be around. So pretty much, I mean, you kind of also said the same thing, how it's pretty much the reason why it's a mobile game. I know you were, I guess, trying to be objective of how the mobile gaming industry is massive. This is why I'm making a video like this, so we understand why the game didn't do as well or meet expectations of what Square Enix wanted it to be. So let's get on with that. Let's get on with all the data. So first of all, let's get a better understanding why the gaming industry wants to shift more onto mobile gaming, especially how in Asia it's very popular. So we have here an article that showcases the mobile gaming industry revenue statistics. A lot of data tables are here, and it has been fact checked. So this is all valid statistics to look into, and they go on here on saying how much the mobile gaming industry worth. So they also, this was actually a very good article to kind of hop into, just because when FF7 First Soldier first released, it came out around 2021. So the fact that we're having data from 2021, we're kind of time traveling back and understanding that perspective on why Square Enix wanted to put out their own mobile battle royale for FF7. So as you see here, from 2019 to 2025, it was rapidly growing a lot, right? And this is all within billions. So it started in 2019 as 85 billion. Then we head on to 2020 during the pandemic, 114 billion, and then it still grew much more to 139 billion, to 152, 172. So up to 2025, we have 201 billion dollars in revenue in USD. And then we go down here and we have a data table that shows the video game industry revenue by device. This is also another way to understand why a lot of studios are kind of pushing for, a lot of these apps, for mobile gaming, just because it makes half as much compared to console and PC. For mobile, it makes $103 billion, while on console it's $53 billion. Not that that's a bad number, but the fact that mobile games make that much have been like the cheat code for a lot of these certain companies that prioritize or focus on, these app stores. And in PC is 40 billion. And as we go down here in the iOS store, if you own an iPhone, they show how much revenue share for each genre makes, or what this certain genre revenue creates for these certain gaming apps. So the top three, and it's honestly not surprising, but we have puzzle, casino, which I'm not surprised about, and we have strategy. The fourth one would be RPG, we have simulation, and then the rest kind of go 5% and lower. Now I'm surprised, like AR location based, I thought that would make a good chunk of percentage just because of the whole Pokemon Go hype and how much momentum it did have and how much events and support from the community it has, especially how it's the Pokemon brand. But we'll get into that later, because over time people do get tired of the same old thing or the same old product. This is pretty much the the statistics I want to share with you guys, the data tables. Now, there's quite more to look into. They go on about, you know, the free-to-play games, of course, the size growth. So they have all these certain statistics. I just wanted to show how much money they create within the market, within the industry, because that's very important to know and understand, so we could all have a middle ground, some understanding when it comes to the mobile market, because there could be people like me who have like a stigma when it comes to mobile games. I mean, I still do, because of certain practices of what they, on how they design certain mobile games. I think it's important to also know and critically think about is the reason why they also make this much money is not in a very traditional way from what you guys would expect from console, PC, for most of the time on console and PC. Because in console and PC, they're not always asking you to kind of, hey, you want to like spend certain amount of dollars so you could proceed to the next level, or, you know, if you want these certain mechanics. There's a lot of, basically a lot of paywalling involved in a lot of these iOS games, or just these gaming apps, whether you're in the Android store or iOS. There's a lot of these apps that are designed for you to milk out your wallet in some sort of way. So I think that's very important to think about, and which is why, you know, they create all this revenue. Why you think the casino is like the number 2 spot in the iOS store when it comes to creating a lot of revenue, especially how that's an actual thing when it involves gambling. Also, you see a lot in person. If you go to the casinos, you see a lot of how a lot of these boomers, they got like at least 3 to 2 slot machines, and they're playing it at once. I've seen some hardcore players out there. Jesus, like, yeah, they are serious when it comes to the casino stuff and spending their money. But I think that's a whole different discussion that we'll kind of save down the line, or maybe talk about. I don't know if I really want to get into it, but you get the gist of things. I think it's very important to know how they create their money as well on here, and also how people just willingly throw a lot of money. Like I said, different conversation topic for another time, but this is the data on when it comes to. So far, what I'm basically trying to say is that mobile games don't really quite give the same quality of like traditional games that you would mostly experience on console and PC. And yes, you know, even though there are games on console and PC, like live service games, that do have heavy monetization, that could still be malicious to the consumer on asking what type of money you have. The majority of the games don't ask for your dollar all the time, which is why we have a chart like this, or a table like this, where the mobile market is making much more than console and PC. But with that being said, how is the retention rate when it comes to console and PC compared to mobile? Like, do people actually take mobile gaming seriously as players who are within console and PC? And that's what I was really wondering about. So we have a blog post by Stream, and it's published by Frank L. This was published in October 2025. And as we go here, they have a chart of the average retention rate by the industry from different categories in the App Store, whether it's business, education, to games. And of course, one of the highest retention rates for day one is gaming. Now, they measured the person's retention rate from day 1 to day 30, so pretty much for a month. And the highest retention rate out here would be games and productivity. I'm not sure like what type of apps would be considered productivity, but games is like right there. So here's the thing when it comes to the retention rate throughout the month. Each and every day, someone slowly, or maybe as fast, they get uninterested on the app. So by the end of the month, you kind of get results from retention rates of like 6% to 7%, 9%. I mean, for games here, we went to 32 to 7% retention rate. So that is a big chunk, but it is expected, because when you go to feature upvote, for those who don't know what feature upvote is, it is a software, and it's also a company that collects a lot of data feedback from players and sends them over to developers, so developers could have a much more streamlined experience collecting data, so that they can improve their game in some sort of way, or their future title, whatever they want to do with the data. So it's just basically so that devs could have a streamlined experience on having insight on what a player wants. So a lot of the data that Feature Upvote is talking about on here on their blog post is from their own data, as they are a software company that collects data. So although they don't talk about like what's an average retention rate, this is what they expect for a good retention rate for mobile games. So as what we saw here in the previous chart or table, a day one retention rate is 35 to 40%, as we see over here. Games hit about at least 32%, right? And then day 7 is a 10 to 15% for games that, at least for here, is 18%, whatever data they're using. See, all data may vary because it depends what type of products they're using and measuring. And then for day 30, it's a 5 to 10%. And that's unfortunate, because let's say if you are putting quality games into the mobile store, it's just kind of a waste on kind of spending those resources just for people not to end up, utilizing. Then again, it varies on how the game is and how the engagement is supposed to be, how it's designed, right? But here for PC and console games, they have higher expectations since there's a certain standard to them, right? So they expect a day one retention of 50 to 60% or more, depending what game it is. A day 7 retention, to still have that 20-30%. Day 30, to still maintain that 20% at least, right? But yeah, it goes to 10 to 20% over here. And that's actually a pretty good percentage. And I expect, higher retention when it's a multiplayer game. Yeah, I expect multiplayer games to hit that 10 to 20% compared to if you're playing a single player game. I don't expect everyone to have a retention on that single player game by the end of the month, because they could have probably beaten it in a week or so, right? There's that. I couldn't find a lot of public info when it comes to the retention rates of PC and consoles. Is actually quite difficult to find. I think I need to log into a database or something just to find that. And this is a video that was kind of quickly made, and I quickly researched all this data for you guys so we could have an idea on the topic on what we're talking about. But I did find this, and I thought this was interesting, how there is a public thread on here talking about the Apple Epic lawsuit, and this person grabbed some slides on here talking about analytics. And what this person highlighted here on Twitter or X is how this person said that mobile and PCs were a good way of acquiring customers. Now, this person is talking about Epic Games, by the way. Both the friction and low price, but they were not sticky. They moved to the consoles to play despite higher costs of acquisition. This person was saying another great lesson for future game studios. And this data was from back then, right? This was before before the years of 2021. By the way, this also applies to Fortnite. For those who don't have context to the Apple Epic lawsuit, there was a time, not too long ago either, where Apple and Epic had a lot of disagreements on how Fortnite was distributed, especially when it came to its revenue, which caused this whole lawsuit. This whole thing became public when it came to its slides. And now we have some juicy info about how console actually has a higher retention rate compared to PC and mobile. But anyway, let's get right into it. So this is a mobile background, current product and player context. So mobile drives new accounts. This was good for Epic Games as they were acquiring new customers due to the 38% of daily new accounts in Fortnite came on mobile. And this was back in 2019. The mobile retention is very low compared to the other platforms because for iOS, it's only 6% on day 30. Android is 4% on day 30, while on PS4, 16%, Xbox One, 11%, Switch is 21%. And the existing console players are more likely to cross-play, so 40% of mobile players have also played on non-mobile platforms, and then approximately 15%, which is like a good little chunk of players, have went to mobile first and then went over to console. And I thought that was a very interesting insight because they wanted a better quality experience for their gameplay instead of playing like on a tiny screen, I assume. So this is the chart or table, and it shows the day 1 to day 120 retention. And so in red they highlighted what was like negative, what wasn't as like significant. And PC surprisingly was 35%, and then it just went lower and then maintained that same retention of 4% as it went to day 120. And it had very similar stats to iOS and Android, while console had a lot more retention throughout the past throughout the 120 days. It went to 49% retention rate, and then to day 30 went to 16, and then up to day 120 it only went down by 3% on the PS4, and then Xbox One only went down by 2%, and then the Switch only went down by 5%. So these are good numbers for a lot of engagement, especially it's really hard to stick to the same game, especially if there's not a lot of content or updates happening. Because I know Fortnite sometimes has a lot of there's some downtimes where they don't have anything new for quite some time, and yeah, it could be stale to keep playing the same game over and over and over again. But these people still stayed and played. I think it's also important to know that this just applies to one game particularly and not the other games. I do predict, because since I don't have the data, I believe that the game, like the retention rate for PC and console, is higher than what it used to be compared to 2019. Because just based off this data alone, the fact that mobile players went to end up being on console to have a better experience in a way, well, not exactly to have a better experience, for whatever reason, they went up to console, shows a lot already, just based off this report. And to wrap this all up, I also want to just add in and talk about how, recently we have been having AAA games into the iOS market. So if you have like an iPhone 15 Pro and up, you would be able to run AAA games on your phone natively, which is like the Resident Evil 4 remake, Resident Evil Village. They even have Assassin's Creed. They have Death Stranding. It has about 123,000 downloads. Oh yeah, by the way, guys, this is all from Mobile Gamer Biz. This is where all the data comes from. This article just summarized it. Assassin's Creed Mirage had 103,000 downloads and then created 138,000 in revenue, which is less than 3,000 people bought the full version of the game. I assume there's like a trial that they're able to experience before experiencing the full game, something like that. It says formally all of these games except Death Stranding are distributed for free on the App Store. However, to access the full version of the game, Apple device owners need to pay between $15 and $50. Not everyone's willing to do this. Just letting you guys know when it comes to that. So Resident Evil Village has 370,000 downloads and it created 92,000 in revenue, which 5.7 thousand people bought the full version of the game. And then Resident Evil 4 Remake had 357,000 downloads and then made 208,000, which 7,000 bought the full version of the game. And Death Stranding, which doesn't offer a free version or a trial of the game, sold about 10.6 thousand copies. That's actually pretty good, for a market that's still quite relatively new when it comes to AAA games. These are not as bad, but at the same time, it shows that there's only a very small percentage where people are not as interested just yet. I guess a lot of these people were more so curious how it was going to run on their phone. I think we're still at that day and age. We're not there yet where we could run AAA games on portable devices. I mean, we have the Switch 2, which has been great to me, and I've been enjoying a lot of games on there. But when it comes to phones, I don't think we're there just yet. I don't know how exactly the performance has been running, but the fact that these games could run, I guess, decently shows. The fact that we have data based off how back in 2019, 50% of mobile players go from mobile to console is it kind of shows like what's happening, on what players really want in their games. So now that I presented all the information to you guys, all the data, I just want to conclude that I still stand on what I said, where Western gamers are not as interested in mobile gaming. I know nowadays we're kind of in a different era, as a lot of people are more into PC gaming. A lot of people have their own PCs. Like 2019 to 2020 are completely different times just because of what happened during the pandemic. So there was a big increase as well, with a lot of new players coming in, but eventually people went their own different ways on how they want to improve their gaming experience. And how I see it is that a lot of people involve themselves in the PC space, which is why the market has changed. Well, with these AAA companies that only prioritize console are now putting their games into Steam, into the Epic Games Store, making them multi-platform. So I still believe that Western gamers are not as fond to mobile gaming, just because, like I said, they just seem like they just want to have a better gaming experience overall, a traditional gaming experience, just like how it was back then. And to have like a Final Fantasy Battle Royale isn't as awful, to be honest with you. I thought that is an interesting concept, but the fact that there wasn't like quality to the game on what gamers initially expected, because that genre itself and platform was just an out of touch thing of Square Enix to do, just because of how Square Enix has cultivated an audience full of traditional gamers, you could say, or traditional players, that people that love to play their games on their PC, on their monitors, or play on their console and TVs. Square Enix has cultivated that audience and just kind of, and they try to shift them over to a different market, which they didn't like, including myself. So when we talk about Final Fantasy First Soldier, with its pre-registration, it passed about 2 million users. So the fact that it still passed 2 million users showed how much they could have really pushed this game. The game was officially released in November 17, 2021, and this was a good way to start out. It's nothing compared to Genshin Impact, where they initially had 10 million signups within its first week and 23 million downloads, right, within its first week, and then they made about 400 million. So I understand why Square Enix decided to kind of cancel this within little over a year, but that's the thing. Square Enix has to realize, because Yoshi P even said it himself during the press when it came to Final Fantasy 16. He said that Final Fantasy 16 has become too niche in a negative way, where not a lot of people, a lot of new generations don't know what Final Fantasy really is. It's just kind of in the back of people's heads instead of being that one popular IP, how it was back during the 90s and early 2000s. Square Enix needs to realize and understand that they are rebuilding. You have to work your way up once more. Compared to Genshin Impact, where they were already established. Even before Genshin Impact, they already had a lot of mobile games in the market back in Asia. And they were also, the way that they marketed was heavy on Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, which actually caused some controversy within the gaming community when they started to make the game in 2017. So, and I remember, because I honestly remember seeing it and thinking how they already made a whole Breath of the Wild clone. But yeah, they were already established, and they probably, I don't know how crazy they went on the marketing, but the fact that they had over 10 million signups and then 23 million downloads in the first month or first week is absolute insanity for this game. And they still continue, even though it's a gacha game, right? And I have strong opinions when it comes to gacha games, at least from what I'm aware of. I'm not sure how it is now, but from what I'm aware of, at least they put in quality content for you guys when it comes to story and how you guys progress through like the open world. And with FF7 First Soldier, I know these are completely different genres, the way how they design their games, right? Because it's a battle royale. Square Enix gave up on this way too quickly to the point where they didn't even want to give this a chance. because they thought they were going to see the big bucks just because it's a mobile game. Which is why I believe that it being a mobile game was a problem from the beginning, and which is why I say Western gamers, I believe that Western gamers don't really enjoy mobile gaming as much. Mobile gaming is more so treated from Western gamers as like fast food service, or if people are curious. I play mobile games myself, but I'm not heavily invested into them. And like I said, I think it's a different conversation to people who spend money on mobile games for whatever reason. And I think if I ever talk about that, it's about to be controversial, because just looking at its stats, just sharing all the data with you guys, I'm very surprised that mobile gaming has a lot of money. It makes me question society, I'm not gonna lie. You know how I said how 2019 and 2020 are completely different times? You also have to account for different types of luck that the industry had. Genshin Impact also got lucky because the pandemic boosted the sales, because everyone was just at home, right? Like the whole world was at home playing games. That's why Animal Crossing made its sales. Final Fantasy VII Remake made its sales. Like within the first 3 days, it made 3.5 million. First 3 days only. So that's absolutely insane. Like, shout out to Square Enix for that. And they really thought they made the right decision to sticking with PlayStation. And then little did they know that they couldn't hit those same numbers with Rebirth for that first week, unfortunately. But not that it didn't make any great sales, because it still did. I mean, if we look over here, right? So Gematsu reported about the Famitsu sales that they have reported, and they opened 262 retail copies sold, and this is based on Japan. This is all based off Japan, not even the US. So just letting you guys know. They do talk about here that Remake for the PS4 opened at 702 copies sold in April 2020. And although that was to an install base of 9.1 million for PlayStation 4s, versus today's 5.3 million on PlayStation 5s, which they are talking about for Rebirth. So yeah, the total that they had for installs was 9.1 million on PS4s for FF7 Remake Part 1, and then Part 2 only had 5.3. But those are not bad numbers at all. But the problem is that, like I said, we're in different times now, where everyone is kind of across different platforms. People moved on to PCs instead of consoles. They got tired of like getting into consoles. Also note that the PS5 wasn't as accessible during the pandemic, just because of, you know, the scalpers and how they were limited on supplies, because we were still in the pandemic. So there was a lack of resources for that, which what split a lot of people into going to the different platforms and heading on to PC. Which is why it's, at the end of the day, it is incredibly important for companies like Square Enix, especially if they're trying to grow again, is to be multi-platform, which they are doing right now. If they keep doing what they're doing, right, and focus on their audience, their core audience, and on what they want, like games like this, like Final Fantasy 16 and FF7 Remake Trilogy, and hopefully Kingdom Hearts 4, they're gonna hit their sales for sure. They're definitely gonna hit their sales. I mean, the fact that Remake in April 2020 was the best-selling game. It was the #1 game. It was followed by Call of Duty Modern Warfare and Animal Crossing New Horizons and NBA 2K20 and Grand Theft Auto 5. You know how hard that is to actually achieve for a game like Final Fantasy? Because Call of Duty is one of the top selling games, not as of this year, but, you know, like throughout the past decade. It is always hard to top Call of Duty until this year in April 2020. So the fact that it was number one selling game here was absolutely insane. Because if you look here, right, if you guys don't believe me that Call of Duty and Grand Theft Auto are not like, and especially, you know, when it comes to NBA 2K, if you don't believe me on how they're like the top selling games here, I mean, GameSpot put out an article on the best-selling PlayStation games of all time in the United States. Grand Theft Auto 5, of course Minecraft is here, Red Dead 2, Grand Theft Auto, Call of Duty, of course Spider-Man, but Call of Duty again, Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto, Call of Duty, Spider-Man, oh, Last of Us, God of War, oh, Skyrim is in here, Black Ops, so Call of Duty again, Rainbow Six Siege, another first-person shooter, which is Call of Duty Black Ops 2, one of my favorites of all time, by the way. Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto, Call of Duty, Red Dead, another Rockstar game. Oh, this is when it comes to dollars. So when it comes to dollars, these were units we were covering. But you get the gist of it, right? I mean, look, Call of Duty, Minecraft, Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto. So it's like the same game over and over again. So the fact that it was able to kind of beat these giants is a big milestone for Square Enix, and that should have been the sign. We're like, we got to keep doing this on how we should, manage our games. And not that it's bad to focus on mobile games, but like, don't put so many resources or don't be so quick on giving up on these certain things, because Final Fantasy is like rebuilding. They're on that regrowth, on trying to reclaim its place. Climbing back to the top. They kind of lost it throughout the years, but I believe that they could do it if they maintain this growth. So to wrap up on why they should continue to create these quality console PC games instead of mobile games, is simply because they actually have a good audience that has a high retention rate finishing their games. Like, they actually go to start to finish. I know this because if you look at PSN profiles, they show the data that comes from your PlayStation, by the way, guys. You can see all this data through your trophies. And I'm using Resident Evil 4 as an example because this is a game has sold a lot of copies. I think it sold 10 million within the first week when this game first released. But these games are relatively short. These are like 10 to 15 hour games. I think from my experience on my first playthrough, I finished in 13 hours or 12. Around there, 11 to 13 hours with Resident Evil 4 Remake, because there's some exploration going on in the game. And as it says here, 41% have completed the game. That's almost half a lot of the users on PlayStation, but let's just like confirm it just in case. Let's look at the trophy here. Complete the main story on standard mode or higher. So as you see here, it is a 41% rate, which is the achievement Promising Agent. Although compared to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which we are about to compare, this, you could also consider this a bit of a low average completion, as like there is a lot of people who actually haven't finished RE4. Like, it just seemed like they played it and they didn't even bother to go through the game once. But let's go on to a Square Enix game, which is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. A lot of people complain how the game is, there's too much content in the game and the game is too long, right? The average completion is 57%. I don't know how accurate this is, because when you pretty much beat the game, it's on chapter 14 and it says a 44%. So I don't know what this means at all. Like I said, I don't know where this stat comes from. Chapter 14 is one of the last chapters, and 44% of people who have this trophy completed the game. And that is an absolutely great sign of retention for those who actually invested into Rebirth. So there was like, what, almost half of 5 million, over 2 million people have completed Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Okay, I forgot the most important point of this segment is that, because I was just editing my video, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth's average playthrough, so I don't know how long it really takes for someone to kind of skip past like the other side content, because there's so much content in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, because it's like an open world game, so you're bound to like bump into a lot of side quests and mini games, all that sort of stuff. So in my first playthrough, I nearly 100%ed. I would say 70%, because you still need to do the hard mode and then the Chadley VR missions, but I spent about 130 hours trying to nearly 100% the game. I can only imagine if you were just beelining the story, it would still take a decent chunk to get through that save file, honestly. So even if it wasn't 100 hours and less, I feel like you're still spending about 50 hours to the end. And the fact that people ended up still beating the game from start to finish, and that's 44%, that's a big W for Square Enix, because it shows that people are really enjoying the formula that Square Enix has been creating so far. And like I said, that's a really good retention rate, because the fact that you have people actually finishing up your game, because it's not as common for a lot of people to finish up, these certain games, because you could go look at your PSN trophies and see how many people got in the first trophy or the third trophy, and it's not always like 99% or not even 90%. Most likely your bronze trophy, that's your first or third trophy in that game, you're bound to see like a 67%, stuff like that, so right, all the stats are from PlayStation. So imagine, like, for multi-platforms, when the game eventually comes out on Xbox and Nintendo Switch. We have this game right now on Steam. To wrap it up, I hate using Reddit as like a source, when it comes to feedback, but people were talking about how we're enjoying Final Fantasy VII Rebirth on this, I was about to say Twitter thread, this Reddit thread, and how it, Rebirth was one of the best-selling games of 2025 in the Steam charts, because here it is categorized here on the silver section. I don't know where it's at though. Or bronze? Is it bronze? I think it's on silver. Oh yeah, it's right here, right by Metal Gear, right? Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is like on silver in the Steam charts for best of 2025. And yeah, people were talking about how they've been enjoying it, or how they never got into Final Fantasy, and since it's released on Steam, now they're able to access it and actually play it and are enjoying it. And they're also speculating that if Part 3 makes it to Steam on release day, the person is sure they'll get good sales, and hopefully it does. These are good signs so far for Square Enix, and it's nice, and I hope they don't bother to prioritize on mobile gaming, because like I said, I do believe that is one of the main problems that they've been doing for over a decade, right? If they didn't decide to also prioritize a lot of their portable console games like Crisis Core, or even with the Kingdom Hearts series, and just focus them on them being a PS3 game, things would have been so different. They would have still been on Capcom's level, because Capcom was actually making, I think, some apps at that time, but they were still making console games at that time as well. I mean, which is why we still have like games like Resident Evil 5, Resident Evil 6, even if they were reforming. I know the Monster Hunter series ended up being on portable consoles, but eventually they had a big comeback when Monster Hunter World. There's all these like variations and speculations when it comes down to this. Let me know how you guys feel. Comment down below. Remember, drop a like, subscribe if you haven't yet, especially if you like these sort of discussions. Sorry if the video was a bit all over the place. I don't have scripts when I'm talking about this, just because it's going to take a lot more time, and I don't know how relevant this video is going to be. That's the state of YouTube nowadays, because they don't really like pushing out my content time to time, compared to certain algorithms like on TikTok. But anyway, dropping a like is very much appreciated. Subscribing if you like variety content, especially Square Enix games, is very much appreciated. So let me know how you personally feel, especially if you're kind of on the same boat as me, or if you still disagree. We agreed to disagree at the end of the day. We're just here to talk about games. But yeah, regardless, I like reading your guys' comments, because they spark critical thinking for me and make me think more thoroughly about how the industry is. And without these comments, I wouldn't even be diving in for like research. When it comes to like mobile games versus the retention rate of PC and console, interesting topic, right? So anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this little or big video. I'm out. Peace.